The shattered cup and cosmic appointment. The teacup shattered against the laws of physics, its ceramic fragments hanging suspended in midair, neither falling nor flying, but rather contemplating their newfound existential freedom with what could only be described as teacup bewilderment. This was, of course, the most ordinary thing that would happen to Bartholomew Berry, humble all day. Berry stood transfixed, his weathered hand still curved around the phantom outline of the cup's handle, watching as each porcelain shard slowly began to reassemble itself. Not back into a teacup, that would have been too conventional, but into a perfect miniature replica of the Galactic Parliament building, complete with tiny flickering lights and microscopic protesters holding impossibly small signs about recent hyperspace toll fees. Not again, sighed Berry, reaching for the broom he kept specifically for sweeping up temporarily displaced household items. At 53 years of bewildering existence, his sandy hair now speckled with gray and crow's feet permanently etched around his eyes from squinting at inexplicable phenomena, Berry had grown wearily accustomed to reality's occasional hiccups in his presence. The scientists from various government agencies had long ago given up trying to explain it, though one particularly enthusiastic physicist had suggested that Berry's mitochondrial DNA was subscribed to a different newsletter about how the universe should work. His modest farmhouse creaked around him as the February wind drove snow against the windows with a sound like someone repeatedly whispering, "Shoo," while simultaneously trying to erode brick with sandpaper. Outside, his bee colonies were tucked away in their winter configurations, insulated against Montana's brutal cold, blissfully unaware that their caretaker had just witnessed yet another violation of causal continuity. Berry's bees were his livelihood, or they would have been if he'd managed to turn a profit at any point in the last 7 years. Still, he persisted with a stubbornness that his ex-wife Mary Ann had once described as, "the only thing keeping the universe from noticing it's made a mistake with you." The day she'd left, taking their sensible hatchback and leaving him with the rusted pickup truck, 17 angry bees had followed her for 19 miles before giving up and returning home with a collective air of disappointment. As Berry swept up the tiny Parliament building, which had now begun passing microscopic legislation regarding the proper exportation of interstellar honey, the radio on his kitchen counter spontaneously turned itself on. This wasn't unusual. Electronics around Berry had a tendency to activate themselves, usually to deliver cryptic messages or, more often, advertisements for products that wouldn't be invented for another century. Weather advisory for northern Montana continues, with temperatures dropping to -20 tonight, crackled the radio in a voice that sounded suspiciously like Berry's third-grade teacher, Mrs. Henderson. And for any beekeepers out there experiencing unusual atmospheric disturbances, please remember to look up at exactly 7:13 p.m. The fate of several species depends on it. Now back to our regular programming of songs that almost made it to the top 100 in 1987. Berry sighed and jotted 7:13 p.m. look up in the small notebook he kept specifically for messages from appliances. The notebook was nearly full, he'd need to buy another soon. His finances, while never robust, had recently descended to what financial advisors might clinically term catastrophic. 3 months behind on his electricity bill, surviving primarily on honey sandwiches and the occasional egg from his neighbor's inexplicably sympathetic chickens, Berry Humble was exactly one unexpected expense away from complete destitution. He glanced at his watch, 6:47 p.m. According to the radio's ominous suggestion, he had 26 minutes before whatever cosmic appointment he was apparently keeping. Just enough time to check on the bees and make sure their heating systems were functioning properly. The orange glow beyond the trees. Montana winters were brutal on bee colonies. Last year, he'd lost 2 entire hives to the cold, and the survivors had buzzed in minor key harmonies for weeks afterward, a somber requiem for their fallen comrades. The frigid air ambushed Berry as he stepped outside, assaulting his lungs and instantly freezing the moisture in his nostrils. Wrapped in a patchwork of garments, his father's ancient army coat, 2 mismatched scarves, and the woolen hat Mary Ann had knit during their first year of marriage when she still found his peculiarities charming rather than alarming, he trudged through knee-deep snow toward the apiary. His breath clouded before him as he checked each hive's temperature monitor, satisfied to find them all within acceptable parameters. The setup consumed significant electricity, explaining the threatening letters from the power company stacked on his kitchen counter, but Barry couldn't bear to lose more bees. They were, in a very real sense, the only functional relationships he had maintained for more than 5 consecutive years. As he secured the final hive, something unusual caught his eye, a faint orange glow emanating from just beyond the tree line that bordered his property to the north. Orange was not a color commonly associated with Montana's winter landscape, which typically featured variations on white, blue, and the particular shade of gray that signifies impending meteorological unpleasantness. In the sky above, clouds parted momentarily, revealing a cascade of stars that seemed to be watching with unusual attentiveness. Barry checked his watch, 7:08 p.m. Whatever cosmic appointment he had, it appeared the universe was getting impatient. Curiosity, that most persistent of human foibles and the instigator of countless ill-advised adventures throughout history, propelled Barry toward the glow. The snow seemed to resist his progress, as though the very elements were questioning his judgment. Nevertheless, he persisted through the small grove of pines, their branches laden with snow that occasionally surrendered to gravity and descended upon his already frost-coated form. What he discovered beyond the trees defied even Barry's considerable experience with improbability. A sleek metallic object, approximately the size of a school bus, had carved a furrow through the snow before coming to rest at an angle that suggested its designer had only a passing familiarity with right angles. Steam rose from its surface where snowflakes made contact, instantly vaporizing upon touching the apparently superheated metal. More striking than the craft itself, however, was what surrounded it, small orange creatures no larger than house cats, with leathery wings and spiky protrusions along their spines. They huddled in groups of 3 or 4, visibly shivering despite their fiery coloration. Their eyes, proportionally large for their heads and an alarming shade of green, reflected the starlight with intelligence and evident distress. Dragons, Barry whispered, the word feeling both ridiculous and somehow perfectly accurate as it left his lips. Space dragons. As if responding to their taxonomic identification, one of the creatures looked directly at him and emitted a sound between a chirp and a sneeze. This apparently communicated something of significance to the others, who all turned to regard the bewildered beekeeper with identical expressions of what Barry could only interpret as desperate hope. He checked his watch again, 7:13 p.m. exactly. The radio's instruction echoed in his mind, "Look up." Dutifully, Barry raised his eyes skyward, just in time to witness the clouds parting completely to reveal a dazzling meteor shower. Except the meteors were moving in formation and, if squinted at properly, resembled distant spacecraft engaged in what appeared to be a heated battle. The desperate rescue mission. One of the dragon creatures nudged Barry's boot and chirped imploringly. It was doing something odd with its front limbs, pantomiming a gesture of gathering or collecting, then pointing toward the crashed vessel, then back at Barry. "You want me to help get something from your ship?" Barry ventured, feeling only slightly foolish for conversing with what might well be a hallucination. The creature nodded vigorously, nearly losing its balance in its enthusiasm. Barry, humble, failed entrepreneur, divorced beekeeper, and frequent witness to violations of physical law, made a decision. He nodded back at the dragon. What followed was perhaps the most surreal game of charades ever played in sub-zero temperatures. Through a combination of gestures, drawings in the snow, and increasingly frantic chirping, the space dragons managed to communicate their predicament to Barry. They were refugees, fleeing from the battle raging overhead. Their ship had crash-landed, and inside were dozens of eggs, their next generation, rapidly freezing in the Montana winter. The ship's hull had cracked on impact, but the breach was too small for the adult dragons to enter safely. They needed someone with human dexterity and opposable thumbs to retrieve the eggs before they froze solid. Barry stared at the steaming wreckage, then at the desperate faces of the creatures around him. In the distance, the space battle continued, flashes of light illuminating the clouds like a cosmic fireworks display. He thought of his own bees, tucked safely in their heated hives, and made another decision that would have horrified any reasonable person. "Show me where to go," he said. The lead dragon, Barry had mentally dubbed him Captain Chirp, guided him to a jagged opening in the ship's side. The breach was indeed too narrow for the dragon's wingspan, but Barry could just squeeze through if he removed his bulky coat. The frigid air bit at his skin as he stripped down to his thermal underwear, but the heat radiating from the ship's hull provided some relief. Inside, the craft was a marvel of alien engineering. Walls curved impossibly, covered in panels that pulsed with soft bioluminescent light. The air was thick and humid, smelling of ozone and something faintly floral. But Barry had no time to appreciate the extraterrestrial architecture. Scattered throughout the chamber were dozens of eggs, each about the size of a chicken egg but with shells that shimmered like opals. Many were already showing signs of temperature stress, their luminous shells flickering weakly. Barry began gathering them as quickly and carefully as possible, cradling them against his chest where his body heat might keep them warm. The dragons outside called encouragingly, their voices now sounding less like chirps and more like words in a language he almost understood. As he worked, Barry became aware of a growing rumble from above. The space battle was intensifying, and he could see through the breach that the flashes of light were getting brighter, closer. Whatever was happening up there, it was moving toward Earth. He had gathered nearly 24 eggs when a new sound joined the dragon's calls, the unmistakable whine of something large and fast approaching from the sky. Barry looked up through the ship's breach to see a massive shadow descending through the clouds, its hull scarred and smoking. The child who changed everything. The approaching ship was enormous, dwarfing the crashed vessel Barry was inside. Its hull was dark and angular, bristling with weapon arrays that glowed with menacing energy. As it descended, the space dragons around Barry began to panic, their chirps turning to frightened squeaks. Barry emerged from the wreckage with the last of the eggs, his arms full of the precious cargo. "We need to get these somewhere warm," he shouted over the growing roar of engines. The dragons were already in motion, some taking flight despite their exhaustion, others gathering the eggs Barry had rescued. But before they could retreat to safety, the massive ship landed with a ground-shaking thud just beyond the tree line. A ramp descended with a mechanical hiss, and figures began to emerge, tall, armored beings with angular helmets and weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. The lead figure removed its helmet, revealing a face that was almost human but not quite, elongated features, silver eyes, and skin with a faint metallic sheen. When it spoke, its voice carried an otherworldly authority that made Barry's teeth ache. "Surrender the Pyrian refugees," it commanded in accented but perfect English. "They are criminals fleeing justice. Interference by primitive species will not be tolerated." Barry clutched the eggs tighter, stepping protectively in front of the cowering space dragons. "Criminals. They're just trying to save their children." The alien leader's expression didn't change. "The Pyrians attacked our colonies. They are a plague that must be contained." It raised its weapon. "Stand aside, human." That's when Barry heard it, a small voice from behind him, barely audible above the wind. "Daddy?" Barry turned to see a small figure emerging from the trees. It was Lucy, his neighbor's 8-year-old daughter, bundled in a bright pink snowsuit and clutching a flashlight. She must have seen the lights and wandered over to investigate. "Lucy, get back!" Barry shouted, but it was too late. The alien soldiers had spotted her, and their leader had paused, studying the child with those unsettling silver eyes. Lucy walked forward with the fearless curiosity that only children possess, completely unaware of the danger. She stopped in front of the alien leader and looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Are you from space?" she asked. The alien stared down at her for a long moment. Then, to Barry's amazement, the towering warrior slowly knelt in the snow, bringing himself to Lucy's eye level. His weapon lowered. "Yes, little one," he said, his voice now gentle. "I am from very far away." Lucy smiled. "That's cool. Are these your dragons?" She pointed at the creatures huddled behind Barry. The alien looked at the Pyrian refugees, then back at the child. Something in his expression had changed, the harsh lines of his face had softened, and Barry could see doubt creeping into those silver eyes. "They are, not my dragons," he said slowly. "They are beings who have lost their way. Oh, Lucy said with the simple wisdom of childhood. Are you going to help them find their way home? The alien leader stood slowly, looking around at his soldiers, at the frightened dragons, at Barry holding the precious eggs, and finally at the innocent child who had somehow changed everything with a few simple words. He made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. The unlikely alliance. The alien leader holstered his weapon and spoke to his soldiers in a language that sounded like music played through crystalline structures. Several of them shifted uncomfortably, but they followed his orders, lowering their weapons and stepping back. Commander Vex, one of them protested in heavily accented English, "The High Command will not approve." "The High Command," Vex replied, still looking at Lucy, "has not seen what I have seen tonight." He turned to Barry. "Human, these creatures you protect, they are not the monsters we were told they were, are they?" Barry, still clutching the dragon eggs, shook his head. "They're just parents trying to save their children." Vex nodded slowly. "As are we all." He looked up at the space battle still raging overhead. "The war has gone on too long. Too many have died for reasons that no longer matter." He knelt again, this time addressing the lead dragon. "Captain Chirp, yes, I know your name, I offer you and your people safe passage to the Outer Rim. There are worlds there where you can live in peace." Captain Chirp approached cautiously, chirping softly. Vex held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, the small dragon placed a clawed paw on the alien's palm. "Lucy," Barry said gently, "we should get you home. Your parents are probably worried." But Lucy was already walking toward the dragon eggs Barry held, her eyes wide with wonder. "Can I help?" she asked. And so, in the middle of a Montana winter, the strangest alliance in galactic history was formed. Barry's heated bee houses became temporary nurseries for dragon eggs. Commander Vex's soldiers worked alongside the Pyrian refugees to repair their damaged ship. Lucy appointed herself official egg counter and name giver, solemnly christening each egg with names like Sparkles and Mr. Wiggles. As dawn approached, the repairs were complete, and the space battle overhead had moved on to distant stars. The dragons were ready to leave for their new home among the Outer Rim colonies. But first, there was one last surprise. Captain Chirp approached Barry with something in his claws, a small, crystalline device that hummed with energy. "It's a communicator," Commander Vex explained. "They want to stay in touch. It seems you've made quite an impression on them." Barry accepted the device, feeling its warm pulse against his palm. "But why?" "I didn't do anything special." "You showed kindness to strangers," Vex replied. "In a galaxy full of fear and war, that is the most special thing of all." As the dragons boarded their repaired ship, Lucy waved goodbye to each one, making them promise to write. The Pyrian vessel rose into the morning sky, followed by Vex's massive ship. But before they disappeared into the cosmos, something small and glowing dropped from the departing fleet, a container that landed softly in the snow near Barry's feet. Inside was a single honeycomb structure, but made of what looked like crystallized starlight. A note in flowing script read, "For the keeper of sweet things." From one hive to another. Lucy picked up the crystalline honeycomb, and it began to glow softly in her small hands. "What is it?" she asked. Barry smiled, understanding at last why the universe had brought all these impossible things to his doorstep. "It's the future, Lucy. And it's going to be amazing." 3 months later, Barry's financial troubles were a thing of the past. The alien honeycomb produced the most extraordinary honey anyone had ever tasted, and Barry's small apiary became the most successful farm in Montana. He hired Lucy as his official assistant, and together they tended to their earthly bees while staying in touch with their cosmic friends. And sometimes, on clear winter nights, Barry would look up at the stars and smile, knowing that somewhere out there, space dragons were raising their young in peace, while a reformed commander was learning that sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest wisdom. The universe, Barry had learned, was full of wonders. You just had to be brave enough to help when they knocked on your door. The end.